Ella Harper's small frame trembled under the gray Chicago sky, her little backpack slipping from one shoulder to the other as she stared up at the disheveled woman sitting on the cold concrete. The bustling sounds of the city, honking taxis, the chatter of people, the distant wail of a siren, blurred around her, but all she could focus on was Mara. Her hair was tangled, her coat frayed, and her boots caked with mud, but something about her seemed alive, untamed, and somehow safe. "Excuse me," Ella called, her voice barely above a whisper at first. She took a deep breath, clutching the straps of her backpack so tightly that her knuckles turned white. I don't have a mom. Can I spend the day with you?" Mara's eyes flicked up, sharp and wary, and for a moment, she said nothing. The wind blew, tugging at the edges of her coat, and a crumpled cardboard cup rattled beside her. She studied Ella, the wide eyes, the small, trembling hands, the tear-streaked cheeks, and something shifted, a flicker of recognition or memory, buried deep beneath the lines of hardship on her face. "Kid, I don't know you," Mara finally said, her voice rough, but not unkind. "Why would you want to spend the day with someone like me?" Ella's lips quivered, but she took a step closer, determined. Because I don't have anyone else. Please, just for today. I promise I'll be quiet, and I won't be a bother." She swallowed hard, and her words came out rushed, desperate, like the city itself was pushing them from her throat. For a long moment, Mara didn't respond. She shifted, pulling her knees closer to her chest, her gaze moving over Ella as if measuring her worth. Around them, the world continued its rush, the smell of roasted nuts from a street vendor, the clang of a nearby bus, laughter from children playing too far to hear clearly. But Mara seemed to exist in a bubble, paused, holding the tiny, desperate girl in her gaze. Finally Mara sighed, a sound that was half resignation, half curiosity. "All right, you can follow me," she said slowly. Her eyes softened just a fraction, enough for Ella to see a glimmer of something almost maternal behind the rough exterior. Ella's face lit up, a spark of hope igniting where despair had been moments ago. "Really?" she whispered. Mara nodded once, sharply, but didn't move. "But kid, I warn you, the world out there isn't safe. Stick close, and don't ask questions you're not ready for." Ella nodded eagerly, gripping her backpack straps. She took another step forward. "I can do that. I promise." And in that moment, on the cold concrete of a busy Chicago park, two lives collided, one desperate for warmth, the other hardened by life, yet carrying a secret that would change everything. Mara hesitated, looking down at Ella, a flicker of something unexpected, fear, hope, or perhaps both, crossing her eyes. Then she finally stood, and with a slow, careful movement, began walking. Ella's small footsteps echoed behind Mara as they moved through the crowded streets of downtown Chicago. The smell of roasted chestnuts from a street vendor mingled with exhaust fumes, and the cold November wind tugged at Ella's scarf, making her shiver. She tried not to stare too much at Mara, but her eyes kept drifting to the woman's worn coat and the way her boots dragged slightly with every step, leaving smudges on the cracked pavement. "Where are we going?" Ella asked softly, careful not to seem too eager. Mara didn't answer immediately. She adjusted the frayed strap of her bag, her gaze fixed ahead, and Ella felt the weight of unspoken words hanging between them. Finally, Mara muttered, "Just somewhere quiet. You'll see." As they walked, Ella noticed the little things that spoke louder than words. A cracked photograph tucked in Mara's coat pocket, the faint scars on her hands, the careful way she avoided stepping in puddles that could soak her boots. It was obvious Mara had been surviving on the streets for a long time, but there was also a sense of resilience, a quiet defiance that made Ella's heart ache with curiosity and admiration. You live out here?" Ella asked, her voice barely above the wind. Mara's lips pressed into a thin line. "Yeah, and I've learned the hard way to trust very few people." She paused, glancing at the small girl trailing her, especially kids. Ella nodded, swallowing her nervousness. She didn't understand all of Mara's pain, but she felt it, a rawness that somehow mirrored her own loneliness. She wanted to ask more, but the look in Mara's eyes told her some questions weren't safe yet. They passed a bus stop, where the harsh fluorescent light flickered, illuminating Mara's tired features. The noise of the city felt distant here, and for a brief moment, Ella imagined this woman might be some kind of guardian angel in disguise, someone who understood hardship better than anyone else. Finally, Mara stopped and turned to face her. "Kid, if we do this, you stick close. There are people out here who won't hesitate to take advantage of someone your size. You understand. Ella nodded without hesitation, though her stomach fluttered with nerves. I understand. Mara gave a slow, deliberate nod. All right, then you can walk with me. But remember, the streets aren't kind, and not everyone wants to see someone like us safe. Ella felt a surge of gratitude, mixed with a twinge of fear. As she fell and stepped beside Mara, she realized that this woman, mysterious, worn, and untouchable, was about to become the most important person in her life. And somewhere in the shadows of the city, a pair of eyes watched them pass, unseen, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. As they walked through the narrow streets leading out of downtown, Ella's mind wandered, tugged back to a life that seemed distant yet painfully present. Her apartment on the north side of Chicago was quiet in a way that felt almost cruel. Most nights, her mother, Karen, would sit in front of the TV, glass of wine in hand, too distracted by reruns and phone calls to notice Ella curled up on the couch with a book she barely understood. Some nights, she wouldn't even notice if Ella hadn't eaten dinner. Her father, Gregory, was even worse. He hadn't been around for years, sending birthday cards that felt hollow and promises he never kept. Ella had long since stopped expecting him to show up at school plays or parent-teacher conferences. She had learned early that adults could disappoint in ways children never deserved. A sharp gust of wind hit her, and she shivered. She missed the small comforts she had once clung to. The way her mother used to braid her hair on Sunday mornings, the soft hum of her father's old guitar. But those memories were distant echoes, reminders of a warmth she couldn't reach anymore. Being with Mara was strange, unfamiliar, and yet it stirred something that had been buried for a long time. A faint hope that maybe, just maybe, someone could care. Ella peeked at Mara, noticing how she carried herself with caution, her eyes scanning every corner, every shadow. The woman's presence was commanding in a quiet way, almost protective, and Ella felt drawn to it like a moth to a fragile flame. Her thoughts were abruptly interrupted when she noticed a figure across the park they were about to enter. A tall man in a dark coat, moving slowly but deliberately, his eyes fixed in their direction. Ella froze, her stomach tightening. Something about him felt wrong. Familiar even. Her mind raced. Could it be someone from her apartment? Her old neighbor? Or worse, someone who had followed her before? She had never told anyone about the small threats that had followed her since her mother's divorce, but the memory came back now. The man who had shouted at her from the street corner last month. The one who had scared her so badly she hid under the kitchen table for hours. Ella's breath caught, and she tugged slightly at Mara's sleeve. "Mara, look," she whispered, voice trembling. Mara turned, her eyes narrowing as they landed on the figure. A tense silence stretched between them. The man paused, noticing the two of them, and then began moving faster, closing the distance. Ella's heart pounded. She realized, with a sick twist in her stomach, that the past she had tried to leave behind wasn't finished with her yet. The man's steps echoed sharply across the cracked pavement, each one closer than the last. Ella's heart pounded, and she froze, unable to move, her small hands gripping Mara's coat tightly. The city around them blurred into a haze of gray and yellow. The buses, the honking horns, the distant shouts of vendors, all fading into the background as fear consumed her. "Stay behind me," Mara hissed, her voice low but commanding. There was no time to explain. Her eyes locked on the man, calculating, sharp, almost predatory. The man lunged suddenly, shouting something Ella couldn't hear over the pounding of her own pulse. She instinctively stepped forward to shield herself, but the world seemed to tilt as Mara moved like lightning, intercepting the man before he could reach her. In a blur of motion, Mara grabbed the man's arm, twisted it sharply, and spun him to the ground with a force that made Ella stumble back in shock. The man cursed, his face contorted in anger, and tried to rise, but Mara kicked his legs out from under him with precision. She pinned him down with a strength that seemed impossible, her voice cold and unwavering. "Back off. Now." Ella could barely breathe. She had never seen anything like this. Mara, the woman who looked fragile and worn just moments ago, now seemed unstoppable, almost like a shadowy force of nature. Her eyes burned with controlled fury as she glared at the man, who now stared at her with a mix of fear and disbelief. Finally, the man scrambled to his feet, muttering threats under his breath, and retreated down the street, disappearing into the maze of alleyways. Mara didn't relax until she was sure he was gone, her chest heaving, her hands trembling slightly from the adrenaline. Ella took a cautious step forward, her wide eyes fixed on Mara. How did you do that?" she asked, her voice barely audible. You were amazing." Mara straightened, brushing imaginary dirt from her coat, her expression unreadable. "Sometimes," she said quietly. "You do what you have to do to survive. That's all." Ella's mind raced, trying to process what she had just witnessed. Mara's mysterious strength, her fierce confidence, the way she moved with instinct and skill. It was unlike anyone she had ever met. She realized there was more to this woman than met the eye. Secrets hidden beneath layers of hardship and survival. For a brief moment, Ella felt a flicker of fear mixed with awe. Who was this woman, really? And what kind of past had forged someone capable of defending her like that? As the wind whistled through the park, Mara reached down and took Ella's hand. "Come on. We're not safe yet," she said, moving forward again. Ella squeezed Mara's hand, a mix of trust and curiosity building inside her. She knew she was stepping into a world far larger and far darker than she had ever imagined. The evening air was sharp, but the glow from the small diner's neon sign made the corner feel almost safe. Mara pushed open the door and led Ella to a booth in the back, away from the few lingering customers and the hum of fluorescent lights. The smell of fried food and fresh coffee wrapped around them like a warm blanket, and for the first time that day, Ella felt a flicker of comfort. Mara ordered 2 grilled cheese sandwiches and a cup of tomato soup, and as they waited, Ella watched her quietly. She noticed the small movements, the way Mara traced the rim of her coffee cup, the slight tremor in her hands when she stirred her soup, the faraway look in her eyes when she stared at nothing. Mara seemed both strong and fragile at the same time, like someone who had lived too much and carried it all alone. You don't have to talk if you don't want," Ella said softly, breaking the silence. Mara looked at her for a long moment, then sighed, a sound heavy with unspoken weight. "I've learned a long time ago that talking doesn't always help. People hear you, but they don't always understand. Sometimes it just hurts more." Ella nodded, feeling a pang of empathy. She understood that. Most nights, she felt invisible in her own apartment, unheard by the very people who were supposed to care for her. When the sandwiches arrived, they ate slowly, the quiet clatter of utensils between them. Mara occasionally glanced at Ella, a hint of something warm flickering in her expression. "You're brave, you know that," she said quietly, almost to herself. "Most kids your age, they'd be scared out of their minds. But not you." Ella blushed, feeling a strange mix of pride and shame. I guess I just don't have a choice." After a few moments, Mara reached into her worn backpack, pulling out a small, tarnished locket. Ella's curiosity piqued, and without thinking, she leaned closer. The locket creaked open, revealing a faded photograph of a young girl, maybe 6 or 7, with wide eyes and a shy smile. Ella's breath caught. She stared at the photo, her pulse quickening. Something about the girl's face, it was familiar, as if it belonged in a memory she had long forgotten. Her fingers twitched, wanting to touch it, to know more, but Mara quickly snapped the locket closed, guarding it with a protective edge in her eyes. "Where did you get that?" Ella asked, heart racing. Mara's lips pressed into a thin line. "It's personal. Something from a life I left behind." Ella studied her, a mix of curiosity and unease growing inside her. Who was this girl? And why did she feel so familiar, like she belonged in Ella's own story? Somewhere deep inside, a quiet alarm rang. Something important, hidden in Mara's past, was about to surface. The diner's fluorescent lights buzzed softly, and outside, the city moved on as if oblivious to the quiet tension at the corner booth. Ella's fingers lingered near the closed locket, a silent plea for answers. Mara stared at her soup, her hands wrapped tightly around the chipped mug, her eyes distant, as if recalling something buried deep beneath years of pain. "You want to know about her, don't you?" Mara said finally, her voice low but steady. Ella nodded, too nervous to speak. Mara's eyes flicked toward the window, then back to Ella, and she took a deep breath. "The girl in that locket, she's my niece." Ella's fork froze midway to her mouth. "Your niece?" Mara nodded, her jaw tightening. "I had a family once. A wealthy family. People with money, with influence, with everything I was told I should want. But I didn't fit in. I never belonged. My parents, they disowned me when I was 16. Told me I'd ruined their reputation, and that was that." Ella's mind raced. A wealthy family, a girl her age. Could it be? She swallowed hard. "Wait, you mean you're connected to them?" Mara's eyes darkened, shadows falling over her sharp features. "Yes, and when I left, I lost everything. Friends, family, security. I've been surviving on the streets ever since. I never thought I'd see anyone from that world again." Ella's thoughts spiraled. Her mother had never mentioned an aunt, and yet The resemblance, the locket, Mara's description, the sadness in her eyes, it all felt connected. Could you be my aunt? She asked quietly, fear and hope warring inside her chest. Mara's lips trembled slightly, and she looked away, as if the truth were too heavy to speak aloud. It's possible, she murmured, her voice almost a whisper. I don't know for sure, but you remind me of someone I lost. Someone who should have been part of this family, part of my life. Maybe that's you. Ella's pulse thundered in her ears. The revelation hit her like ice water, shocking and unbelievable. Mara, the woman she had trusted, the woman who had defended her, might be her aunt, the family she never knew she had. The diner around them felt smaller suddenly, the noise of the city muted, and a strange energy hung between them, one part hope, one part fear. Ella realized that Mara's mysterious past was far more tangled and dangerous than she had imagined, and as Mara's eyes met hers, a silent question hung in the air. If she was her aunt, could Mara protect her from a past that was now creeping closer than ever? The morning sun was pale, filtering through the gray Chicago clouds as Mara led Ella down an alley behind a row of closed shops. The city hummed in the distance, but here it felt quieter, almost suspended in time. Mara stopped and knelt beside a small puddle, showing Ella how to gauge its depth before stepping, how to avoid slippery patches, and how to keep her footing steady on uneven ground. Small things matter, Mara said quietly, her voice patient. A misstep could get you hurt, or worse. You've got to notice the details, even when your mind wants to drift. Ella watched her intently, absorbing every movement. She tried, clumsily at first, to mirror Mara's careful steps, but the woman's calm presence made her feel braver than she had in months. Mara noticed and gave a faint nod of approval. Not bad. You're learning faster than most adults I know. They moved through the streets like shadows, Mara explaining how to stay unnoticed in a crowd, how to read the expressions on people's faces, and how to recognize danger before it arrived. Ella's curiosity and admiration grew with every lesson. She had never imagined she could trust someone like Mara, someone who had survived so much, and yet here she was, teaching a 7-year-old girl to survive the city. At one point, Ella reached out, touching Mara's arm. Do you ever miss having a family? She asked softly, the words hesitant but sincere. Mara's jaw tightened, and she looked down at the concrete beneath her boots. Every day, she admitted, her voice low, almost broken. But family isn't always the people you're born to. Sometimes it's the people who stick around when everything else fails. Ella nodded, feeling warmth in her chest. For the first time in years, she felt like she belonged somewhere, even if only for this moment. But as the city's noise crept back in, the honking, the chatter, the distant footsteps, Ella noticed something unsettling. Across the street, partially hidden behind a lamppost, a man watched them. His features were obscured by the shadow of his hat, but his gaze never left Mara and Ella. Who's that? Ella whispered, a chill running down her spine. Mara followed her eyes, her expression hardening. I don't know, she said quietly, but the sharp edge in her voice told Ella that this was no ordinary passerby. But we need to be careful. Someone's been watching us, and I think they've been waiting for the right moment. Ella's stomach tightened. The sense of safety she had felt only moments ago was slipping away, replaced by a creeping, silent fear. The narrow alley seemed to close in around them as Mara and Ella turned a corner, the city's bustle fading into an uneasy silence. Then, without warning, voices cut through the air, low, sharp, and menacing. Mara's eyes narrowed as 3 men emerged from the shadows, their suits too clean for this part of the city, their smiles cruel and calculated. Mara Davenport, one of them said, his tone a mixture of mockery and threat. It's been a long time. Thought you could disappear, huh? Mara's jaw tightened. I didn't disappear. I survived, she replied, her voice calm but steely, like a coiled spring ready to snap. The tallest man stepped forward, his eyes cold. Survived, yes. But you took what was ours, and now it's time to pay up. Or maybe you think the streets protect you. Ella pressed herself against the brick wall, her small hands covering her mouth to keep from screaming. Her heart raced and her mind spun. She knew Mara was strong, but seeing her confronted like this, so unflinching, yet outnumbered, filled her with raw fear. Mara didn't flinch. She took a slow step forward, her voice low and dangerous. You've got one chance to walk away. Leave, or you'll regret ever finding me. The men laughed, a sound devoid of humor. Oh, we'll see about that, the tallest one said, reaching into his coat. Ella's stomach dropped. The glint of metal caught her eye. Knives? Guns? She couldn't tell, but the danger was immediate. Mara's movements became fluid, precise, a dangerous dance perfected over years. She shifted her weight, ready, eyes flicking from one man to the next, every step calculated. In a sudden blur, she disarmed one, spun him around, and sent him crashing into a dumpster. The other two lunged, and she blocked, parried, and countered with a skill that left Ella wide-eyed in awe. Ella ducked behind a stack of crates, peeking cautiously through the gaps. Her heart thumped violently in her chest, fear mingling with awe as Mara moved like a storm contained in human form, relentless, fierce, unyielding. The alley echoed with shouts, grunts, and the metallic clash of struggle. Ella pressed herself closer to the wall, wishing she could help, wishing she could do something, but knowing she couldn't. Mara faced the danger alone, and every second felt like an eternity. Then, for a brief, terrifying moment, Mara staggered, a flash of vulnerability that made Ella's breath catch. The night air was sharp and cold as Mara dragged herself behind a stack of abandoned crates, her coat torn and a thin trickle of blood running down her arm. Ella crept beside her, trembling but determined. "Mara, are you okay?" she whispered, her small hand brushing against Mara's shoulder. Mara shook her head slightly, wincing. "I'll live, but we need to keep moving," she murmured, her voice low and strained. She led Ella down a narrow alleyway, far from the confrontation, until they reached a small, hidden corner where the city lights barely touched. Once there, Mara sank to the ground, breathing heavily. Ella crouched beside her, panic rising in her chest. I can help," she stammered, eyes wide. "I know some first aid. I saw it in a video once." Mara gave a faint, tired smile. "You're brave, kid, braver than me sometimes." She allowed Ella to gently dab at the bloodstain with her scarf, wincing occasionally, but not stopping her. For the first time, Ella felt useful, needed, and the warmth that spread through her chest was stronger than any fear. As they sat in the quiet alley, the sounds of the city muffled in the distance, Mara finally relaxed enough to let a sigh escape her lips. "I've been alone for a long time," she said softly, her gaze distant. "Too long. But you make it bearable." Ella felt her eyes fill with tears. "I'm glad I met you," she whispered. I feel safe with you." Mara's expression softened, the walls she had built over years cracking just enough to let her humanity shine through. "And I with you," she admitted quietly. "You remind me that not everything is lost, that people can still matter, even after everything." After a few moments, Ella's gaze wandered to Mara's bag, tossed beside her. Something glinted in the dim light, a small envelope, sealed and stamped with an emblem she didn't recognize. Curious, she picked it up and carefully opened it. Inside were documents, letters, photographs, even a legal-looking paper with Mara's full name, her family connections, and proof of her once wealthy life. Ella's breath caught. This was more than she had imagined. Mara wasn't just a woman surviving on the streets. She had a past, a story tied to a world Ella had never glimpsed. And it was real, undeniable, tangible in her small hands. Mara looked at Ella, noticing the document in her lap. "Be careful with that," she said quietly, a warning in her tone. "Not everyone should know. It's complicated." Ella's pulse quickened. The revelation made her heart pound with a mix of excitement and fear. Mara's life wasn't just dangerous. It was tied to something much bigger than either of them had faced yet. The morning light spilled over the rooftops of Chicago as Mara and Ella sat on a low wall overlooking a quiet street. Mara's arm was wrapped loosely around Ella's shoulders, and for the first time in days, there was a hint of calm between them. But Mara's mind raced, plotting every step carefully. The documents Ella had found weighed heavily on her thoughts. Proof of a life she had tried to leave behind, a past that demanded reckoning. "We can't run forever," Mara said, her voice measured, almost cold in its clarity. "Those men, they'll come after me again, and this time, they won't hesitate. We need a plan, and we need to be smart." Ella nodded, her small fingers twisting in her lap. "What do we do?" Mara glanced at her, a soft smile breaking through the tension. "We fight, but not with fists alone. We use our heads. The city has ways to hide, to move without being seen, and we'll use that, step by step." She laid out a map on the wall, marking key streets, alleys, and safe spots. Ella listened carefully, trying to absorb every detail. Mara's strategy wasn't just about survival. It was about reclaiming control, about refusing to let fear dictate her life any longer. The woman's strength inspired Ella, teaching her that courage wasn't just about confronting danger, but about planning, thinking ahead, and believing in yourself even when the odds were stacked. For a moment, Ella dared to hope. Maybe they could do it. Maybe they could reclaim something more than safety, dignity, respect, even justice. Mara's determination was contagious, and the small girl felt herself swelling with pride and a sense of purpose. But just as they were about to leave their vantage point and move through the quiet streets, a sudden commotion erupted ahead. A heated argument between two men escalated quickly, their voices sharp and full of menace. Mara instinctively stepped forward to shield Ella, but in the chaos, a strong hand grabbed the girl's arm, yanking her backward. "No!" Mara shouted, but it was too late. The crowd swallowed Ella, and Mara's heart lurched violently. She lunged, but the man disappeared into the throng, pulling Ella with him. Panic flooded Mara's senses, a cold, burning fear she hadn't felt in years. Her mind raced. Where had he taken her? Who was responsible? And most importantly, how could she get her back without losing herself in the process? Mara's heart slammed in her chest as she sprinted through the crowded streets, weaving between pedestrians, her eyes locked on the small hand that had vanished into the chaos. Every instinct she had honed over years of surviving on the streets screamed at her. Ella was in danger, and there was no time to think, only to act. She caught sight of a narrow alleyway and darted in, shadows stretching long and dark under the flickering streetlights. There, at the far end, she spotted a figure holding Ella tightly, dragging her toward a dark van parked just beyond the alley. Mara's stomach twisted, fury and fear merging into a sharp, singular focus. "Let her go!" Mara shouted, her voice slicing through the air like a whip. The man spun around, startled, and for a brief moment, Ella's wide eyes met Mara's. Hope surged through her. Mara lunged, striking the man with precision that sent him staggering back, releasing Ella. The girl scrambled to Mara's side, trembling, but otherwise unharmed. "Grab my hand!" Mara barked, grabbing Ella and pulling her into a narrow passage. The man recovered quickly, shouting threats, but Mara moved like a shadow, ducking behind crates, vaulting over obstacles, never letting him catch a glimpse of her full strength. They ran through the maze of streets, adrenaline pumping, hearts pounding in sync. Mara's mind raced, calculating every turn, every hiding spot, every possible escape. Behind them, the man's curses echoed, but he could not keep up. Finally, they emerged onto a quieter street, the sounds of the city returning, blending with their heavy breathing. Mara pressed Ella close, checking her for injuries. "You okay?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, though still tense. Ella nodded, gripping Mara's coat tightly. I think so." Her voice trembled, a mixture of relief and lingering fear. Mara allowed herself a brief moment to breathe, the tension easing just slightly. But then, as she glanced at Ella, her hand brushed against something she had missed earlier, the crumpled envelope Ella had discovered days ago. Inside, Mara noticed a letter she hadn't seen in years, one that should have remained buried. A legal notice, with a name she hadn't expected to read again, one connected to her old family, and to Ella's mother. Her breath caught. The rescue had been only the beginning. The past wasn't done with them yet. The city's lights blurred through the rain-streaked windows of the abandoned cafe, where Mara and Ella had taken refuge. Mara's hand shook slightly as she unfolded the crumpled legal notice, her eyes scanning the faded ink that carried decades of deceit. Ella perched beside her, sensing the gravity in Mara's tense silence. It's her," Mara finally whispered, voice barely audible. "Your mother. Karen Harper. She knew about my family. She knew exactly who I was, and Mara's throat tightened. She helped orchestrate a lot of the chaos you've lived through. I didn't want to believe it, but it's true." Ella's mouth went dry. Her mind stumbled, tripping over the words, refusing to accept them. "Mom did this?" She knew. Mara nodded slowly, eyes filled with bitter clarity. "Yes." She feared that if I reappeared, it would expose her own family connections. She wanted to control the narrative, keep you close, and maybe make sure I stayed out of your life. Ella's chest constricted, a storm of betrayal and confusion raging within her. She had spent years yearning for a mother's love, for protection and guidance, and now the revelation cut like ice. Her mother, the one person she had thought was fragile but reliable, had been manipulating events behind the scenes, allowing threats to follow her, perhaps even endangering her on purpose. Tears welled up, blurring her vision. Why would she do that? Mara's hands gripped Ella's small shoulders firmly. Fear, greed, pride. Adults sometimes make choices that hurt the ones they claim to love. I've seen it before, and now, it's your turn to decide how you respond. Ella felt her emotions twist, anger, grief, confusion, and a strange flicker of resolve. She had trusted Mara, a woman who had fought for her survival when the world seemed impossible, and now she knew that trusting her mother could come with consequences she wasn't ready to face. Her heart raced as the weight of choice pressed down. Should she confront Karen and demand answers, risking another layer of betrayal and pain? Or should she place her faith entirely in Mara, letting the woman who had protected her guide the next steps? The rain outside intensified, tapping against the windows like impatient fingers, echoing the turmoil inside her. Ella's hands clenched in her lap, her mind wrestling with fear, love, and loyalty. Finally, she looked up at Mara, her wide eyes searching, seeking guidance, and found herself asking the unspoken question. Could she trust the woman who had been a stranger yesterday, but now felt more like family than anyone she had ever known? The rain had softened to a gentle drizzle as Mara and Ella found a quiet spot on a park bench, the city around them muted by the fog of early evening. The air smelled faintly of wet pavement and autumn leaves, and for the first time in days, Ella allowed herself to breathe fully, feeling the tension in her small body begin to ease. "I don't understand how it all got so messed up," Ella whispered, her fingers entwined with Mara's. I just wanted someone to care." Mara's eyes softened, a rare vulnerability breaking through her usual guarded exterior. "I know, kid, and I should have been there sooner. But life has a way of throwing us off course. Sometimes the people who should protect us can't, or they make choices that hurt instead." Ella nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. "It's not just me, though. I feel like my whole life has been tangled in secrets and lies, and I don't know who to trust." Mara sighed, brushing a damp strand of hair from Ella's face. "That's why you have to rely on the people who show up when it matters, not the ones who pretend, or the ones who disappear. Trust is earned, and sometimes it comes from the least expected places." They sat in silence for a few moments, letting the weight of the past wash over them. The fear, the betrayal, the confusion, it all seemed to settle, replaced with a fragile sense of understanding. Ella felt a warmth spreading through her chest, a budding belief that she was not alone, that she could finally feel safe, even if only for this moment. Mara's voice broke the quiet. "We've both lost a lot, but maybe we can start putting the pieces back together. One step at a time." Ella squeezed Mara's hand, a small, determined smile tugging at her lips. "I want to try," she said softly. "I want to be brave like you." Mara smiled faintly, the edges of her hardened demeanor softening. "You already are, Ella. Braver than you know." But before they could linger in this fragile peace, Mara's phone buzzed sharply, slicing through the quiet evening. She glanced at the screen, and her face went pale. A single message appeared. "We know where you are. Be ready." Ella's heart skipped a beat, and Mara's eyes darkened with a mixture of fear and determination. The moment of calm had ended. The alley was dark, slick with rain, the puddles reflecting the harsh glow of streetlights. Mara moved silently. Ella pressed close to her side, their breaths shallow but steady. Somewhere ahead, the figures who had been stalking them waited, shadows lurking like predators ready to strike. Mara's eyes scanned the darkness, calculating every step, every escape route, every possible move. "They're here," Mara whispered, her voice tight with focus. Ella nodded, clutching her hand, heart racing. Suddenly, the first man lunged from behind a dumpster, a knife glinting in the dim light. Mara's reflexes were immediate. She twisted, grabbed his arm, and used his own momentum to fling him into a stack of crates. Ella gasped, but Mara whispered sharply, "Stay behind me." Two more men appeared, flanking her from opposite sides. Mara dropped to a crouch, her movements fluid and precise, a deadly dance honed from years of survival. Ella ducked instinctively, watching as Mara disarmed one and spun the other into a wall, forcing a loud crash that echoed down the alley. Ella felt a surge of courage, remembering Mara's lessons. She helped block a man who tried to corner them, throwing a discarded trash can lid in his path. Mara's eyes flicked to her, a fleeting smile breaking through the tension. They moved as one, instinct and trust guiding them through the chaos. But just as victory seemed near, the tallest man, the one who had orchestrated the attacks, slipped through a side alley, moving with the speed and cunning of someone who had planned for every scenario. Mara lunged, but he vanished into the shadows, leaving a sense of unfinished business hanging in the air. Panting, Mara turned to Ella, checking her over. "You're okay?" she asked, voice low but steady. Ella nodded, adrenaline still coursing through her veins. "I think so," she said, though her hand shook. Mara's eyes caught something on the wet pavement, a small, folded envelope, dropped deliberately. She picked it up and opened it cautiously. Inside was a photograph of a tall building, the name of a law firm scribbled in the corner, and a cryptic note. "Everything you want to know awaits inside." Ella's brow furrowed. "What does it mean?" Mara's jaw tightened, the flicker of worry returning. "It means the past isn't done with us yet, and whatever answers we need, we'll have to go to them ourselves." The city felt different that morning, quieter, gentler, as if Chicago itself had exhaled after the storm. Mara and Ella sat on a worn park bench overlooking the lake, the sun breaking through the clouds, glinting off the rippling water. The danger that had haunted them felt distant, replaced by a fragile sense of peace, hard-won and luminous. Mara's eyes followed the boats gliding across the water, a small smile tugging at her lips. "We made it," she whispered, almost to herself. Ella leaned against her, comforted by her warmth, her trust in this woman absolute. The envelope's clue had led them to a small law firm downtown, a minor connection to Mara's estranged family. The antagonist, the man who had chased them, who had seemed unstoppable, was revealed to be a distant cousin, bitter over inheritance and old grudges, his anger fueled by jealousy more than malice. Confrontation with him had been brief, but decisive. Mara's calm and authority ensured the past could no longer harm them. Ella watched Mara carefully, noticing the subtle relaxation in her posture, the way she let out a slow, steady breath, allowing herself to finally release some of the tension she had carried for years. "I didn't think I'd see this day," Mara admitted softly, eyes misty. "Safe, free, like maybe I could start over." Ella reached for Mara's hand, squeezing it tightly. "You saved me," she said simply. "You didn't have to, but you did." Mara looked down at her, a rare vulnerability shining through her normally guarded exterior. "And you saved me too," she said, her voice tender. "You reminded me that family isn't just blood. It's love, it's trust, it's standing beside someone when the world is against them." They sat together in silence, the wind tugging gently at their hair, the distant sounds of the city blending into a soothing rhythm. The trials, the betrayals, the danger, they were all behind them now. Ella rested her head on Mara's shoulder and whispered softly, "Are you okay?" Mara's eyes softened, a tear glistening at the corner. She brushed it away and smiled, a smile that held exhaustion, relief, and hope all at once. "I am," she said quietly, "because of you." The lake reflected the morning sun, sparkling like a promise, a new beginning. And in that quiet, shared moment, they both understood that family, found, chosen, and nurtured through courage and kindness, was the greatest gift of all.